This webinar is going to give a high-level overview of the new product features in KEPServerEX version 5.15. So this version includes a new driver for the Omron NJ Machine Automation Controller, or MAC. Also new functionality for our BACnet IP driver, which now supports some new calendar and schedule properties, and support for SNMP version 3 AES encryption. And finally, a change to data logger, which is an update on monitor item. So lots of stuff packed up into this release, and even more than what we're going to go over here. So if you have questions at the end, you can obviously field those to me, and we'll have some Q&A. I also want you to note that in addition to KEPServerEX product, we made a recent improvement to our ClientAce product, which now supports Visual Studio 2013 and .NET 4.5. Okay, so let's look at the new driver in this release, Omron NJ. And before we get into discussing the driver and the demo, I want to know what your experience is with KEPServerEX, so I can kind of tailor the demo and the information to your experience level. So I'm going to go ahead and launch that poll. And if you would just vote. Experience from 1 to 5. 1 is, you're a beginner, no experience, and 5, you're an expert. So go ahead. I'll leave that poll open for 30 more seconds so that you can go ahead and vote. So 1 to 5, 1, you're a beginner, and 5, you're an expert with the software. You have a lot of experience there. Okay, let's share this poll. And it looks like a lot of you rated yourself in the middle there, with about 40% as mid-ground, had some experience. But there are also about a quarter of you that are beginners, so that's good to know. And I'll explain some things a little bit more as we walk through this presentation. Okay. So the new Omron NJ Ethernet Driver, what this supports is the Omron SysMac NJ MAC. So Omron is one of the largest PLC suppliers globally, and they recently released this new controller series. The SysMac NJ MAC is Omron's complete machine automation solution, so that it integrates logic, motion, vision, safety, robotics, sensing, and enterprise, all into one bundle. So what that means is you only need this one controller for maybe an entire machine or a production cell. So the Omron SysMac NJ is designed to be faster than earlier Omron FINS protocol. And it's meant to be quicker, and in order to integrate the controller with existing plant systems, what you're going to need as a user is software that can obviously talk to this new NJ device, which does use a new protocol. So some existing software vendors, NJ does support FINS as well, so some existing software vendors might say, well, just use our FINS protocol. Others are communicating through another software abstraction layer. So you use their server, their software, go through another software application layer to get to the NJ. Really both methods are going to eliminate any performance and functionality you can gain from this new version of SysMac NJ controllers using the native Ethernet IP protocol. So some of you may be familiar with SIP, Common Industrial Protocol, and Ethernet IP. So what you might want is obviously an Omron NJ native driver that communicates using Ethernet IP to fully realize the benefits from that device. So with those considerations in mind, Kepware thus responded to help cover this gap and developed the Omron NJ Ethernet Driver for KEPServerEX. We actually collaborated with Omron to develop this driver. They helped us out a lot, and they actually endorsed our Omron NJ Ethernet Driver. So the idea here is you can connect with us to the device and then can communicate up to any HMI, MES, or other client applications that you have connected. Any questions so far on that? Okay. So the idea here is that you can communicate to everything in your existing system like other Omron devices or Modbus controllers, as well as the new Omron SNMP NJ controllers. Lets you realize the benefits of that faster, more efficient communication using that native NJ protocol. So the features of the new driver, we do support what's called automatic tag generation. So you can connect to the device and suck in the entire program there and import, all the I/O points and any of the other items that are specified in that controller and bring them into the server. We do support that native Ethernet IP communication. We do allow routing using SIP, Common Industrial Protocol messaging, and I'll explain a little bit more about that in the demo. And we do support symbolic addressing. So you basically can address this controller when you're setting it up. When you're programming it, we can consume all those symbolic addresses that you configure in your program. And we have access to primitive and structured tags. Okay, so before we move on to the demo, Kepware, we'd like to thank Omron for helping our engineering team in the development effort. Their contribution certainly made the driver robust and featureful, and we're very thankful that they were willing to collaborate with us on this. Okay, so before we begin, again, I'm going to launch a little poll here to figure out which of you have experience with the NJ Max or might be using another Omron type of device. So go ahead and answer if you're using any Omron devices, fins controllers, the new NJ Max, or other devices. Okay, so it looks like lots of people are voting here. And I'll leave this open for a few more seconds. Okay, great. So let me just share that with you. Looks like a good chunk of you aren't using any type of Omron devices, but a few of you are using some of those Omron devices. So we'll go through the demo, and what the demo will do is for the beginners on the call, you'll also kind of get a tour of KEPServerEX and see how, in general, our drivers work and our server is set up. Okay. So I'm going to open what's called my configuration window here. KEPServerEX's configuration window is basically akin to maybe a PLC programming software that you might use. So you might use PLC programming software to program a ladder or different information into a PLC to perform a certain control tasks. And then same idea with our software. In our configuration window, you can program in connections to those devices, and you can basically say this is how my channel is my path, how I want to connect to that device, and then specify specific devices under channels with specific IP addresses and using different maybe models for the different protocols that you might be using. And then once you specify your path, your channel to the device, and then the specifics for the device itself, like model and ID, IP address, that sort of thing, then you can go on to import tags or create tags, which are just references to the items or registers in that device that you want to consume. So whatever data that device, whatever I/O data device that device is outputting. Okay, so I have an Omron NJ channel device already created here. I'm going to go into device properties and kind of give you a little tour. Here's the device IP address, so it just has the IP address and then a \1/0 to target CPU slot location in the backplane of that device. Sorry, I still had the poll up there, so I'm going to hide it now. So you should be able to see my screen now. Okay. All right, so here's device properties. And for those of you who couldn't see my screen before, here's the channel and device I was talking about. And we go into properties, and we see device IP, and then \1/0, and that's how you would address this device. And you can leave the \1/0 out. The reason we have those backslashes is because Omron NJ supports what's called routing. So basically you can have other controllers connected off the backplane of these controllers, and you would specify information in that device ID area and basically just append things to the main IP address that you're targeting with these backslashes to target another unit that might be attached. So for here we have an NJ501 that's has a CJ Ethernet IP port attached. So we target the hex 10 address of that CJ device, go out Ethernet IP port 2, and then route through to the NJ301 with this IP address. So you can see how you can route through devices. Basically, this might be the case where you have like a master PLC or something like that. Okay, so we're just going to target one device. Something else to look at here is this communication parameters window. This is very similar to some of our drivers where if they're using the SIP protocol, you can specify connection size and specify array block size. So if you have large arrays or large structures in your program, we can pull that in very efficiently in a big block. Okay. Some of you are asking if we can go over the beginning of the configuration screen. I'm going to go ahead and continue with the Omron NJ demo, and then at the Q&A section at the end, I can walk through a little more slowly the config screen so that everybody who may have missed that part because the poll was still up can see where we're going. Okay, so again, we're in device properties, in communications parameters, and you can specify things like connection size and bytes and array block size, which allows you to basically suck in a lot of data all at once in a big block from these controllers. Okay, so the last thing I want to show you here is options. We have automatic tag generation for this device, which again means that we can go out to the device, walk the entire program, and suck in all the items that are in that device. So we have an option to do an expanded and condensed auto tag generation. If I go into database creation and click this auto create button, you would see that we generated in the expanded mode a huge list of folders here that relate to the different arrays that you may have configured in this Mac. If I go into my second device here, I'm going to show you the condensed version and once again go into database creation and click auto create. And I do want to show you down here, if you look at the event log messages I'm getting, once I click that auto create button, you can see that we're retrieving controller project. There we go, we hit the Omron device, and again this is similar for other devices that support this type of database creation. So we get details of the device, the product code, the firmware revision it's running, and then its serial number. So helpful information there. And then down at the bottom here it says it's generated a database of over 5,000 tags, and it's completed the automatic tag generation. So let's look at what a condensed mode looked like. In the expanded mode we had a folder for each array that was in that controller. In the condensed mode, all the array tags are actually just in the root device level here. And then we only have folders that correspond to some nests that you may have made in that device. Okay, so that's specific to the Omron NJ, that expanded and condensed, but the automatic tag generation features and the SIP connection size features and array block size features are more generic and kind of correlate to how some of our other device drivers work. Okay. Any questions there on Omron NJ? Great. Well, in summary, Omron NJ Driver, fast communication option for those NJ controllers, can be used with your existing device connections and used to feed data up to any connected application, anything that's OPC enabled, or anything like that. Okay, let's move on to BACnet. All right, so for those of you new to building automation, the building automation and control network protocol called BACnet is really widely used in these building control systems. So in this industry, as in others, a communications platform like KEPServerEX is a pretty attractive option because data can be gathered from many different controllers and sensors and systems that you have throughout the building and centralized in one place and then rolled up, sent to visualization software where you might be trending or graphing or showing some useful information. So building engineers use calendars and schedules that are part of these controllers to control things like thermostat settings, lighting, alarm activation, and door locking, and many other things according to requirements from the business. So take locking doors, for example. During the work week, you might program in a schedule that says all facility doors should lock down after 6 p.m. and open up at 6 a.m. So a building engineer would program a weekly schedule in the BACnet controller to do this job. Compared to that to when maybe the plant is closed on a holiday, so all the doors should be locked throughout the day for that holiday, an engineer then programs something called an exception schedule in that case. Engineers, they want an easy way to interact with these schedules and their properties using existing software. So with KEPServerEX, a building automation engineer could connect to their current automation software systems and have access to editing and displaying these calendars and schedules with the new features we added in this release. They could program these schedules remotely or make changes on the fly or connect any of their existing HMI or OPC enabled software. So the BACnet driver for KEPServerEX, BACnet IP driver, currently supports calendar properties. So we support, these objects are big, and I'll show you what what I mean by object when we get into the demo again. But we've supported calendar and schedule objects for a while. So the new property within these objects we support is called a date list. And so what that does is just define a list of dates such as holidays or special events, or maybe if your company is off every Friday in the summer, that says we might want to do something special as far as scheduling for those dates. So again, we've supported the schedule object prior to this release, but the new properties in the schedule objects define a weekly schedule of operations, like what we gave in the example just a moment ago, or an exception schedule. So those are the new properties: date list, weekly schedule, and exception schedule, the three new properties we support for those scheduling objects. The way we display these properties is in what's called a condensed string format, and we'll see what that is in a moment. And we do support automatic tag generation for these new object properties. So before we launch in the demo, again, want to know if you're actually using these BACnet devices. And go ahead and very simple poll, yes or no, are you using BACnet devices? Okay, I'm going to leave it open for a few more seconds. I'm getting some good responses, so thanks for everybody who is answering. Again, the question is, are you using BACnet devices, yes or no? And if you don't know, that's fine. You don't have to answer. Okay, I'll go ahead and share this with you. Looks like about a third of the people on this call are using BACnet devices. So that's great to see. And for the rest of you, again, just touring the BACnet functionality will give you more experience with how KEPServerEX works. Okay. So first thing I want to show is the configuration page for this KMC controller we have connected in our Kepware facility. The objects we're going to focus on, and this is just a web interface. This has nothing to do with Kepware software. It's just a web interface that's specific for this controller. So the first thing I'm going to do is go into Setup and go to Objects. So in BACnet, the structures of controls and data that you're getting are called objects, and objects have lots of properties associated with them. So if I go into the calendar object and I look at one of these calendars, I can see maybe a big list of different entries that shows different dates or date ranges that I might want to store in my controller as a special item. For example, maybe it signifies a holiday or something like that. Now if I go into the schedule object area, I see this is what the schedule object looks like. It has different values that are associated with it. If I go into weekly schedule, I see what are called time value pairs. So this weekly schedule is pretty sparse. It only has one time value pair for Wednesday. So it might be saying, at 5 p.m. on Wednesday, change the temperature or turn off the lights or something like that. But weekly schedules can have a lot of information in them. So this one, this Schedule 7, shows time value pairs for every day of the week. And maybe this is a thermostat control, so it might be ramping up the temperature or cooling down the building depending on the time of day. And this value would be written to maybe some type of thermostat or temperature controller. Okay, so this weekly schedule and these calendar objects, these different date list entries here, and then what we would call an exception schedule, which is kind of a hybrid of a calendar object and a weekly schedule with the time value pair, are what we can now access using KEPServerEX, and I'll show you what that looks like. So I have configured in KEPServerEX a connection to this KNC controller. I'm using our BACnet IP driver, and if I go into the KNC controller, I can see if I go into this tag import tab, I do have the option to select objects, and I would be able to select the calendar and schedule objects for that KNC controller and then do auto create, do automatic tag generation. Okay, so here are the three items, the three properties that we now support: this calendar, date list, schedule, exception schedule, and weekly schedule. And the format of this address here is object, then instance ID, so I'm looking at the third calendar, and then the date list for that. So that's the property I'm referencing. So if I want to look at what the date list, exception, and weekly schedule look like, I see the string data type in my quick client, which I'm just connecting to KEPServerEX to see my data. And I see this long string here, just a bunch of comma delimited information for weekly schedule, for exception schedule and weekly schedule, and you would see that for date list too. So what does that mean? Well, I'm going to go ahead and get into the BACnet IP driver help file. If you get into address descriptions, BACnet IP objects, and then all the way down here we have a new string format section that you can use to understand what's happening in these long strings of values. So if I get into the weekly schedule string format, I see that there's a bunch of entries separated by commas, and then each entry as a whole gets separated by a semicolon here. And then it tells me, what the content of these entries are. And there's four things: time, data type, length, and value. So if I scroll down the bottom here, there's examples. So for example, I have on Tuesday, my time is 5:06 a.m. My data type is an unsigned integer, and then my value is 12345. So how that would translate into the string down here is I have my Monday entry, and then a semicolon, and then my Tuesday entry, 5:06 a.m. The 2 corresponds, if I scroll up here, to an unsigned integer. The 5 corresponds to the data length, which is just 12345, so 5 for data length, and then the actual value is 12345, and that's my first entry for Tuesday for my time value pair. So those 4 items correspond to one time value pair for Tuesday. Now we do have, these strings This is the way some other OPC software handles this as well with this string format, but it can be, a little unruly to understand what's in the string and understand how to take that string and actually make it useful in your HMI or in your client. So to help with that, we actually included in our help file these VBA scripts. And what they do is allow you to parse that string. So if you have a little VBA editor in your HMI, you can plop this BACnet API we provided in that VBA editor and parse the string into something that is a little more workable than just a long string of values that you need to work to understand. So I can show you an example of that. We have here a rough little HMI that we wrote internally, so nothing too fancy. But if I right-click here and go into the VBA code, you see that I'm using that same exact information I had in the help file, copied and pasted here to parse the string. So if I have, I'm pulling in the string here. If I go into runtime, I'm pulling in the string here and then parsing that into the start and end date and the priority and time value pairs using that Kepware BACnet API. So some good examples there on how to actually use this data once it's in the server. So I have nothing connected here, but you might see the string here, the same string that you would see in the quick client. And then we would parse out the date list into a start date and end date and the time value pairs here. And that's all done through the VBA code that we helped you out with through API. Okay, so any questions there? So I do have one question from Kevin. Can the string be exported from the quick client to allow interpretation offline? So can you take that string from the quick client and figure that out offline? And the answer is you can't export that from the quick client in any way, but if you export that string to a database through data logger or link the string to a memory location using link master or advanced tags, then you can take that and look at that string data offline that way. You can also do that through any HMI or OPC client that you might have. You can suck in that string and look at it through your client. Okay. Any other questions on that BACnet functionality? Okay, so in summary, the new BACnet enhancements allow users to dynamically change these calendar and schedule objects. You saw in the beginning of the presentation, I did that through the KMC web interface. But if I wanted to control that information through HMI or anything that has an OPC connection, or even, like we were talking about, log information to a database using Kepware's ODBC connection options like data logger, we can bridge that information from the BACnet controller to anything else. Basically translate it from BACnet to any other protocol or other connection. So that's where the power for that functionality comes into play. Okay, any other questions on BACnet? Great, well let's move on to SNMP. We have new driver support for version 3 AES. And these SNMP driver capabilities have been expanded to include 128-bit AES security for SNMP 3. And then now we also support Cisco-specific extensions for 192 and 256-bit encryption. Not going to go through a very extended demo here. If I create an SNMP channel and device here, again, in our configuration, when you create a new channel, you're creating a path of connection to the device. So the basics for creating a channel and a path of connection to that device is specifying channel name. Then you choose driver. So obviously for this demo, I'm going to choose SNMP. We have some advanced options, but typically you'll just select things like a network interface if you're communicating over Ethernet. And I'm just going to leave all the defaults besides that. And then I'm going to go ahead and create a device where I'm going to specify something like a specific device IP. Again, leave the defaults for most of this, but then when I get to SNMP communications, I'm going to say, oh, this device is a version 3 device, so I want to select version 3. You know, port doesn't change, protocol doesn't change. And now this is where I get into the new authentication options in SNMP v3. So I'm going to choose authentication privacy. And you can select your hash type. So for those of you who have experience with SNMP or kind of IT, you may know a thing or two about that. I'm not going to explain it here. And then your passphrase, and this is where in this SNMP v3 security window we've implemented the changes. So now, before we only had this DES option, now you can enter AES 128, 192, or 256. And I'm just going to finish that device creation. Most of our default settings are meant to get you there the first time. You might have to go back into device properties after you set it up through the wizard to kind of play around with things to try to get connected if you can't do it right off the bat with just the defaults. But you know, don't stress out when you're going through those wizards for the first time. Don't worry about all the different settings. You can usually just leave them at default right off the bat. And again, in this v3 security tab and device properties for the SNMP device, this is where you can, you have your passphrase, and down in this privacy section is where you would specify 128, 192, or 256-bit AES. Again, the 192 and 256 is Cisco specific, so the device manual does have to say it supports the Cisco specific extension of 192 and 256 in order for that encryption to work. Okay, so any questions on SNMP security? Great. So certainly not least, but the last item here is the data logger new trigger that we have, which is a trigger on monitor item change. So go through a quick demo here as well. I'm going to go up again in my configuration window here, I go up into this little drop-down menu which takes me to my different plugin views that I have. I'm going to get into our data logger plugin. Previous to this webinar, I had created a database connection to our database server. I had mapped some items, and data logger has been around for a while, so I'm not going to go over in depth all these different options here, but basically I created a DSN data source name to connect to my data source, my database, which is a SQL database in this case. I specify which items from the server I want to pull, so I can add an item by just browsing through my server configuration, so all the different channel devices I had already created. And I just have 3 tags here, which are actually simulator tags to simulate a ramp, a random number, and a user-defined function that I created. And then I go into triggers, and this is where the change happened in this trigger window. So if I click Add here, you'll see a trigger type that you can select. So I have always triggered, which means the trigger will always be true, and it might log at a certain interval or something like that. I have a based on time, which means used to be called our absolute trigger, which means you can log, maybe you only want to log Monday through Friday from 8 to 5 p.m. and after that you don't want to log data, or outside of those hours you don't want to log to your database. And then we have a based on expression trigger, which says, I can specify an item here. Maybe it's just as simple as some type of Boolean, and I say, when that, or a ramp, so I say like when that item is greater than a specific value, then start logging data. So those are actually, that's all functionality that we had previously. Where the change comes in is here we have this log entries for all items when the monitor item value changes. So we had static interval before. You could log on a static interval, like once every second. You could log on a data change whenever any data within your items, within this monitored item, this data map list changed. So if any one of these items changed, there would be a record insert. But now, within V515, we have this log entries for all items when one item, a monitor item value changes. So you specify your monitor item. So say, for example, it's this ramp, and maybe this ramp signifies a batch or a shift change or something like that. So anytime the value of this ramp changes, we're going to log and insert a record. So that's what this trigger is that I have set up here. And you can layer in these static interval data change and monitor item changes with any of our absolute, based on time, or expression based on condition triggers as well. Okay, so let's just get into the database to see how that's set up. In the meantime, while we wait for this to launch, are there any questions on Data Logger? So I have a specific database set up for me here, and I have this data change test table. So I'm just going to select the top 1,000 rows there. And you see I'm triggering on this ramp value. So anytime the ramp value changes, I should have a record insert for all 3 items. So here I have ramp, it changes to 2, and then I get an insert for the 3. And then ramp changes to 3, and I get 3 items again. Ramp changes to 4, and so on and so forth. So instead of inserting a record anytime any of these items change, it's just whenever the ramp tag changes. So that's change on monitor item, and that's something that I know customers have been requesting for a long time. So we're happy to be able to give that to you. Okay, so if there's no questions on Data Logger, before we get into the general Q&A section, just wondering, final poll question: will you use any of these new features in KEPServerEX version 5.15? So go ahead and answer that poll. Are you going to use any of these new features, the Omron NJ Ethernet Driver, the calendar and schedule properties, those new properties, date list, weekly schedule and exception schedule with BACnet IP driver, the SNMP V3 AES Security, Data Logger's new trigger on monitored items, so there's been a lot, or none of those at this time. So go ahead and answer that for me. If you could, I'll leave that up for a few more seconds. Okay, go ahead and select. You should be able to select multiple, but I may have messed that up when I set up the poll question. So if you can only select one, just select which one you would use the most, I suppose. Okay, so go ahead and share this with you guys. And you can see a lot of you, it looks like 50% said that, yeah, you're going to use that trigger on monitor item, so that is great to see. And some of you are going to use the Omron NJ Ethernet Driver, and then we got a few for SNMP and BACnet, so that's great. Okay, so we can go into Q&A section now. I did have a little question pop up after we had stopped the BACnet demo, and one was that does the VBA script allow you to build a string and write back to the controller? And the answer is yes, certainly. So the VBA script goes both ways. It parses out the string for you, and then allows you to write to different items that you've parsed out of that string, and then bundles that back up in a string format and write it back to the server. So that's what the VBA script is there for. I'm getting a question here. How easy is it to upgrade from 5.14 to 5.15? I have to go through reconfiguring it, or will it bring all of my channels back in automatically? So great question. When you upgrade, we have a little OPF, which is our project file format. That is preserved. So you don't need to worry about losing any of your channel device or setup, and that goes for plugins as well. So as a precaution, you should go into your configuration here and go File, Save As, save that OPF off somewhere else, maybe to a network drive or to a USB stick just in case. But it is a feature of the server that when you upgrade, that project file is maintained, and it should just reload in your newer version. And that goes for any channels and devices you have set up, as well as any plugins you have set up. And the trigger changes we made to data logger, all backwards compatible with previous versions. How many tags can you log using the data logger? Great question. We have no hard-coded limit. So when you buy a license for data logger, it's basically, as much as your hardware can support, you can plop into data logger. We're not going to limit you there. That being said, you might want to do some tests. You want to make sure that your hardware, if you're going to be logging a massive amount of tags, has enough memory, enough RAM to handle that. But if you have further questions on that, we definitely can help you out. Currently, we have customers that have hundreds of log groups logging hundreds or more items in those different log groups. So it's certainly a very powerful tool. Okay, so I'm getting a question here. Any other features that have been updated in the server besides the ones we've covered? So the answer is yes. There are certainly a lot of features that have been updated in the server that we haven't necessarily covered here. So if we go into our Kepware Technologies page, we're going to look at something called revision history, and that's where we contain our release notes. So our release notes here, the v5.15 release notes, cover everything that has changed if you want to know more. One of the things that is kind of cool that has changed that we didn't cover here was we have an OPC UA client driver, and we added redundancy, media level redundancy, so the capability to fail over between two OPC UA servers that are connected into that driver. So that's kind of exciting, and again, you can find out information like that in our revision history if you go to our website. Okay, question on upgrading again about whether or not the license remains intact if you upgrade. The question is yes, your licensing is maintained through the upgrade process. Here's a question about the BACnet driver. So they're asking, have you already used the KEPnet BACnet API with Siemens WinCC SCADA software? I will have to get back with you, Yassine. I'm not sure if we've tested it specifically with that software, but if you are interested in using the VB script and kind of testing it out yourself, we do offer pre-sale support here. So you can call us up, and if you need help setting that up or figuring out how to use it with the WinCC SCADA, our applications engineers here, our senior applications engineer Sam and Ray, they'll both be able to help you with that sort of setup. Another question, what's new with ClientAce? Again, ClientAce now supports Visual Studio 2013 and .NET 4.5 officially. So those are the new items with ClientAce. Nothing necessarily big there, but just the fact that we support Visual Studio 2013 and .NET 4.5. Okay, another question on the Omron NJ Driver. Question of what's the cost and if it's included in Omron Suite. So the Omron NJ Driver, if you go to our web page and you go to our purchase list, you can see what's in the Omron Suite there, and it is included in the Omron Suite. So if you've already purchased the Omron Suite, it would be, and you're under support, it would be included in your upgrade, and that Omron Suite is $895. Another question here, when can we expect full-fledged support for OPC UA in the Kepware Suite? So it's interesting. full-fledged support for OPC UA is really in no vendor product right now that I know of. OPC UA is a very large and complex specification. So currently, for those of you who aren't aware, Kepware supports OPC UA. We're an OPC UA server, and we have what's called an OPC UA client driver. So you can connect to other OPC UA servers from our server using the client driver. And we support real-time data through that connection, and then a lot of the other type of connection properties for that real-time data. So how we get data updates and those type of things. And now with the OPC UA client driver, we support redundancy. We're doing kind of a piece-by-piece adoption of how we support OPC UA. So within the OPC UA protocol, there's also, or the spec, there's also an option for historical data, for alarms and events data, and no other vendor that we know of supports those right now, and no customers have been asking us for that. As soon as customers do ask us for that, we'll begin evaluating, and having a plan for how we're going to integrate that into our UA functionality. So, yeah, the answer to full-fledged support for OPC UA is that we already have quite robust support for OPC UA, but the spec is very, very large. So we're looking to you, our customers, and to the marketplace to determine how we move forward with supporting OPC UA, because there's no point in us supporting, alarms for OPC UA or history for OPC UA if nobody's going to be actually using it in the market. Okay, another question. Since Kepware is getting into the logging and client, is there a trending component coming to Kepware? No trending. Again, that's more of a client software job. So our plugins do act as clients to the server in order to consume data, for example, with data log, consume data and push that out through an ODBC connection. But no plans, as I know of, to support kind of that visual trending or any of that visualization aspect that an HMI or client software would handle. We do have in the works an HDA component where you can take information from the server and historize it, and then use that with maybe an HDA client for those type of trends. Okay, great. Any other questions? I'm going to circle back to that question in the beginning that said, go through a little slower in the configuration. Since I had that poll question up and you can see what I was talking about. So again, this is our configuration window. It says KEPServerEX runtime up here, and you see what we call channels, which are these little gray things, devices, and then under some of these devices you're going to see what we call tags. And this configuration window lets you configure device connections. So you can say, I want to configure a connection to an Omron device, or to a Modbus device, or to a database, another data source, or an SNMP device. So you specify a channel, and on the channel level is where you say, okay, I want to connect to an Omron NJ type of controller, and through, maybe an Ethernet connection. We also have, for example, this is a Modbus TCP/IP Ethernet, but you could also choose from our list of drivers Modbus RTU serial or ASCII serial, or any of the other protocols that we support. So on the channel level, you say, okay, this is the type of communication I want to do. I want to do Modbus over Ethernet. And then on the device level, you're going to specify maybe an IP address, what model of device you're connected to, and on the device level is also where you can usually do things like import files to create that item database, or what we call a tag database, which contains all the item references and addresses for the different registers or I/O points in that controller that you want to read or write. So that's kind of an overview of your configuration for those of you new to KEPServer. Okay, so Scott, great suggestion. He's saying you might want to briefly mention some easy channel device level optimization, or other device channels. So great, Scott. I think you and I are going to be friends. Tips for channel and device optimization. We usually recommend one channel per device. So here you can see I have 2 devices nestled under this Omron channel. What is kind of a more advanced topic is the fact that one channel is one thread, and you can think of it as a single lane highway. So if I have a single lane highway with 2 cars trying to go, they're going to have to take turns to use that path of communication. Whereas if I broke these 2 devices out and made a second Omron NJ channel, and I'm just going to go ahead, actually I shouldn't have chosen this one because it has a lot of tags in it, but I'm going to go ahead and Control-C and Control-V, so just copy-paste to create a secondary channel. And then, I just delete device 2 there and device 1 here. So now both of these devices have their own dedicated lane or path. They can communicate in parallel. So we recommend that for, obviously it would be fitting if you're using Ethernet. If you're using something like Modbus serial, you're not going to be able to use multiple channels because they're serial by nature, so they're going to have to take turns. But for Ethernet devices, and if your network bandwidth can handle it, we do recommend one channel per device. So don't, open up one channel and then plop 100 devices under it and expect to get data back very quickly, because all those 100 devices are going to have to take turn over that single thread or path. So it's a good idea to split them out. Okay. So here's a question: does Omron Suite support DNP3 protocol to communicate with devices? So the Omron Suite contains Omron drivers, as its name would suggest. We do have DNP drivers. They're not included in that suite. They're included in their own DNP suite. So you can purchase that second suite for DNP in order to get that DNP3 connectivity. Okay, so here's a great question from Sumi. Without OPC UA alarms and condition support, what is the best way to get alarms and conditions data out of the system at the consuming end? And then, so OPC UA, like I said, has built into it the ability to be an alarms and conditions communicator. We do have something called the alarms and events plugin. So if you are looking to evaluate alarms on the server level, you can use our plugin. You connect to something you might have on the server level. So I'm going to connect to maybe my ramp tag I have here. And then you build in what we call conditions to test, send messages to the operator and so on and so forth. And you can send this alarms and events data to any alarms and events, OPC alarms and events clients. So it's OPC alarms and events, not OPC UA, so a different type of OPC specification. So there's that option. The other option you have is simply send real-time data up to your client, and a lot of HMI and client software supports the evaluation of alarms. There's software called Win911, which uses an OPC DA or OPC real-time connection to consume real-time data and then evaluate alarms on the client level. So that's the type of software that you could use to do alarm evaluation. And simply because we don't support it in OPC UA doesn't mean that you can't get to that data. And then there's a question, the second question is data logger mapped to RDBMS, relational databases? And yep, the answer is that we log through an ODBC connection, so that does include relational databases like SQL, like Oracle, and Microsoft Access, and those different types of database connections. So the different database connections that you can do using ODBC, Open Database Connectivity, you can log with data logger. And then another question from Daniel: is there a way that data logger can log directly on a text file to a text file like CSV? No, there's no option right now for data logger to log to text or CSV, but there is a workaround that basically if you have small data sets, so it can't be a huge amount of data, but you can connect that to KEPServerEX with Excel using our DDE interface and save that data from Excel to CSV files. And I believe there's an option also through Access Yeah, using if you're using data logger to log to access, they have kind of like an Excel converter, Excel export tool that you can use there, and then you could go from there to convert Excel to CSV. Okay, great question here. Is DNP3 supported over serial as well as Ethernet? And yes, we have drivers for both DNP3 Ethernet and DNP3 serial, and that should be included in your DNP suite. So question here, multiple channels only works if you have multiple ports and NIC cards, right? Actually, multiple channels can work over the same NIC card and same port with most of our drivers. Again, we're just opening up a thread, so that thread can go over, for example, these Omron devices, these two channels I have set up here, they would be able to communicate over the same network interface card. There are certain drivers, our BACnet driver is one where you do either have to multi-home your NIC card or have multiple NIC cards to have multiple channels, but that's because of the nature of BACnet, how that communication works. And with most of our drivers, most of our standard Ethernet drivers like Omron, like Modbus, you can use just one NIC, one port connection. So question from Philippe, we have Omron Suite, where and how to get and install the new NJ driver. So if you have the Omron Suite, very simple, download, you should have a My Kepware page, so if you log into My Kepware, you would be able to download the current version for 5.15 and simply go through the install process to upgrade and modify your install. And that new NJ driver will run for you. If you have the license and you're under support, you will be able to use that new NJ driver with your Omron Suite. Do note, though, that you do want the license for Omron Suite on the computer that you're upgrading, and you should be under support for that to work. Is it possible to create an email when a tag reaches a limit? So this has to do with kind of let's call it alarming kind of functionality. So no, you can't send an email from KEPServerEX. That's the type of thing like a program like Win911, which specializes in alarming software, could do for you. So they would be able to send you an email or send you a text message based off the data that our server is gathering. So DDE, question again about DDE. DDE is supported on Windows 8 and higher. Someone thought it wasn't supported, but it is supported. So you can still use those DDE connections. DDE connections is actually what Excel uses actively for software connectivity, so for application-to-application connections. Wow, well this is a inquisitive group, so I really appreciate your participation and your questions. Oh, more questions coming through. Okay. Does Kepware attend the OPC interoperability events? Yes, we certainly do. We attend those interoperability events, and we also have our software lab certified in the US and Germany in order to test it to make sure it's compliant with the OPC specification. And Kepware is an OPC Foundation certified product. We have the gold certification, which means we get that lab certified test where we send our software to a lab for third-party validation, and we're A+. So we're highly certified. And we're also an OPC Foundation member. We've been a member of the OPC Foundation since 1998. Question from Roman, how is it possible to synchronize tags between a UA server and a UA client, inclusive description unit, etc. in an easy way? Is synchronization possible automatically? That, for our UA client driver, is not necessarily, if you're talking about like adding tags to the UA server and then the UA client automatically getting those updates, that's not possible with our UA client driver currently. You would need to do what's called a browse to that UA server to look for any new tags and create a subscription to any new tags that you've added. I can't speak for, however, other UA client software. So there might be other UA client software out there. For example, Ignition is a UA client supported by inductive automation, and they may support something like that. I'm not fully aware of their capabilities, so that's the sort of thing you want to check out through client software vendors, see if they support that. I'm not sure if that's something that's supported through the OPC UA spec. I assume that's something that a vendor would have to do explicitly. Okay, does Omron Suite support all layers of DNP3? That is a question I would have to get back to you on. As far as I know, Omron controllers in DNP3, Omron has native protocols. Those protocols are different than the DNP3 protocol. So to use our Omron drivers would mean you're using that native protocol with the Omron controllers, and then you would use our DNP3 driver and suite to communicate DNP3. So they're two separate suites. So if I go again into my products list here, to communicate natively to those Omron controllers, you'd use the Omron suite, which does not include anything for DNP3. And then to communicate via DNP3, you'd use our DNP server suite. Okay. Can KEPServer manage serial modem connections to do a poll calling? I'm not familiar with the term poll calling, if that's something specific to serial modems.
I'm not sure. Are we talking just like round robin type calling?
Are you talking about round robin type of polling, Santiago, using AT commands?
Yeah, I'm not sure.
Yeah, we're not sure of the terminology you're using, Santiago. So if you want to email us offline with your question there, we can get back to you. Okay, so does Kepware has a solution for Siemens SiMotion D425? So we do have Siemens support. If you go into, again, our purchase list, you can see our Siemens OPC server suite, and we have the different Siemens protocol here. So specifically for the SiMotion D425, if it supports any of these protocols here, we'd be able to connect to it. Okay, so we're 5 over the hour here, so I'm going to go ahead and end our Q&A period. If I didn't answer any of your Qs or questions here, or if you have just comments or any information, please contact us. I'm going to go ahead and pop our contact info up on the screen. You know, Kepware here, I'm with the training department. We have an array of training programs, these type of webinars and other things that you can access. So email us if you're interested in more type of education. Again, we have that pre-sales support. Email sales@kepware.com if you're interested in that. And then as always, our technical support team is available for you. And if you're ready to download the software, you can go to kepware.com, log into my Kepware, and get the newest version. Okay, thank you, everybody. You're a great audience, and I really appreciated your participation.